Hi, welcome to my channel, Mostly Knitting. If you're a returning viewer, thank you so much for coming back. And if you're new here, I'm Tash, and this is a weekly podcast where I talk mostly about the knitting that I've been doing during the week, and I also put out regular tutorials. So this is a special episode where I do a bit of a wrap up of the knitting and a little bit of crochet that I've done in 2024. I wouldn't normally have done this if I wasn't doing a podcast, but I'm so glad I did because it's really interesting to go back and take a look at what you've made over the year, and I'm sort of going to use that to help me with my plans for 2025. So I made 65 items this year. Some of them are small, they're just a washcloth or a pair of shorty socks. So, it's easier to get up to those numbers if you're making small items, but there were some larger ones as well. So just in summary, what I made quite a few garments. I made 3 camisoles. So when I say camisole, I mean something that doesn't have any sleeves. So 3 camisoles, 10 tops. So a top that actually has some sleeves. And then I made 7 pullovers. Just the 1 cardigan, 1 vest, and I did make 1 skirt, although there was no knitting on it in 2024. I did have to add buttons, and I over-dyed it a number of times. So there was enough work in there to get it to a finished object. So I'm including it in this list, even though most of the knitting was done. I made 5 scarves or shawls, 8 pairs of socks, although they were all small socks. And the largest item on my whole list is hats. I made 21 hats. One of those was for a newborn baby, but the rest of them were all, either adult or, large child kind of size. And I made 7 washcloths. 4 of them were knit and 3 were crocheted, and 1 Christmas bauble. So I'm going to start with the camisoles and just work through that list and show you mostly photos. I'm not going to try everything on because this video would take forever otherwise, but I'll put up photos of myself wearing them. So I'm going to start with the camisoles, and I'm wearing one. This is one I actually forgot to shoot a photo of the other day, and then I thought, I'll wear it for the podcast because it is about 31 degrees here at the moment, which is almost 90 Fahrenheit. So definitely camisole weather in Sydney at the moment. So this is camisole number 9 by My Favourite Things Knitwear, and I knit it out of Knitting for Olive Cotton Merino in the colourway Bark. And it used 2.6 skeins, so it definitely needed to get into the 3rd ball quite substantially. It doesn't look like it would be like a lot of knitting, but all of like that much yarn, but all of these double knit button bands actually, and there's a folded hem as well, take quite a bit of yarn. So I knit the extra small size, and the needle size that you're meant to use is a 3mm, but I had used this yarn for my pie camisole, and for the pie camisole I used a 2.5mm needle. For this one I used a 2.75, and the gauge was 30 stitches over 4 inches. So definitely a fine gauge knit, but for this kind of weather, I think it just means you're going to be a little bit cooler. So more knitting, but I think higher wearability. So I knit it to extra small and pretty much true to size. All of the details will be on my Ravelry project page. I knit it about 13 inches. I'll just stand up and show you. This will be the only one that I'll show you actually wearing. The rest I'll just show you photos. So I knit it 13 inches from underarm to hem. And I definitely picked up, I always read Ravelry project notes before I start something, just to get an idea of any modifications people made. Apparently the pickup rate that was listed in the pattern was too large, like too many stitches. So I followed other people's notes and picked up a lot less. It's quite, sorry, just get my necklace out of the way. It's quite a detailed process getting these, you actually pick up from the wrong side, fold over, and then sewing this down is actually, there are videos to support it, but it is definitely, this is not I'll just bang that out, it's a sleeveless top. That'll be really quick. 30 stitch gauge, folded hems, all of this detailing. But that is what actually makes it such a lovely, I think it's such a lovely garment. I'm so happy with it. I'll just show you the back. It's got quite, it's got quite a high neckline and a high back. Just show you the back. It's got a folded, did I already show you a folded hem on the bottom? So some really, really lovely features, totally worth it, but definitely a time investment. The needle that you use for the hem is a really small needle as well. So it was a 2.75 that I used, a 2.75 millimeter needle for the body, and I used a 2 millimeter needle for the pickup. So, you know, very definitely a big time investment, but totally worth it. And the yarn is lovely. It is a 70% cotton, 30% merino blend, and I found it really easy to work with. Just that amount of merino made it very easy on my hands. My hands didn't get tired at all. It didn't feel like working with wool, because obviously like that level of cotton, it does feel different in your hands. But in terms of the give that the yarn had, I could knit with it as if it was wool. Like, it was definitely really easy to knit with, and like so nice to wear. So I love this yarn, totally rate it, and I can see myself making lots more garments with this yarn. This year I also made another camisole from my favourite things knitwear. I made camisole number 4, and this time I used Knitting for Olive Pure Silk in the colourway Raspberry Pink. So I made the size extra small, and that has a bust size of 28 3/4 inches, and I was pretty close to gauge because mine came out at 28 inches, and I knit it 10.5 inches from the underarm to hem. So that one actually weighs substantially less. I got that out of less than 2 balls. It only weighs 160 grams. And it was a very straightforward pattern, very great, like really good directions for both of them actually. This one and camisole number 4, the directions were really clear. I really like the shape of it. I like that you can actually modify the straps to whatever length you want to make sure that it's sitting at a depth for the cup that you're comfortable with. And I actually also really like the back detailing of it as well. So a really great pattern, a much quicker knit than camisole number 9, that's for sure. And certainly for here in Sydney, a really wearable garment when it's really hot. My third camisole that I knit for the year is the Audrey top by Petite Knit, and that is the second time that I've knit that top. I made a black version previously. This one was in a really lovely orangey colour, poppy colour of Shibui Knits linen, and I held that double. And this was yarn that I unravelled from a previous item that I never got anywhere. In fact, I didn't even finish, Hain by Kirsten Johnston. So I was really glad to be able to repurpose the yarn and make it into something wearable. So this pattern is actually knit bottom up, and instead, so bottom up, so you decide the length, and then from here you work upwards, front and back separately. I chose to do a provisional cast on for the front and back, do the front, do the back, keep the stitches at all points, like at the 2 corners on the front and 2 corners on the back, on hold, and do the I-cord straps later. And then I unravelled the provisional cast on from both front and back, put it together and knit down. And yeah, that worked out really well. It just meant I could knit it to the length that I wanted. I could get the fit right. My gauge was significantly tighter, even holding that yarn double, and I knit it on a 3.75 millimeter needle, so 1 needle size smaller. Even holding that yarn double, my gauge was 24 stitches, so it did come out a bit smaller, but I think that suited, for me, that worked well. It's a 30-inch bust finish circumference, and that's 2 inches of negative ease for me, and that just feels nice and comfortable. And I knit it 10 inches from the underarm to the hem. And yeah, I really like it. I think it's another great one for Sydney weather. When it's particularly hot. It's very easy. There's no finishing, aside from just doing those I-cord straps, which you can then, and they take almost no time because there's like 20, for me anyway, there was like 20 rows in them. Yeah, so I really like a lovely knit. It weighs 150 grams, so it used 3 balls, and yeah, I'm really happy with the final outcome. My row gauge was also smaller, but I found that worked in my favour because I followed the pattern for the front and the back as written, but with a smaller row gauge, it just meant the depth from here to here, it just kept it a little bit higher, so that I'm still able to wear a strapless bra underneath it, and you can't see the side of the bra. So like if the row gauge wasn't as tall, like I think it would end up quite a bit further down and I wouldn't be able to wear it without a bra. With the black one, that's not as big an issue because the yarn is a bit heavier and thicker and it's black. So like I can kind of get away with it, at least sort of, wearing it casually to the beach or whatever. But with this orange one, it would just be like, I wouldn't feel comfortable wearing this particular one in this particular color anyway without a bra. So I'm really happy that the row gauge was shorter so that it lifted everything up. Otherwise, you could have just done the decreases a little bit more rapidly, but it would have just been a little bit of modifying. So they're the 3 camisoles that I knit this year. Working through the tops that I made, out of the 10 tops, the first one that I made was the Anker summer shirt by Petite Knit, and I used some Habu yarns, 100% bamboo, that I'd had in stash since 2009. So a really, really long time to be sitting waiting to be knit up. But it was something that I'd bought on D-Stash, and I knew I would be able to get more of it. So I needed to be quite, and it felt absolutely beautiful and luxurious, but it was also quite heavy. So it really needed the right pattern for it. So I'd already knit the Anker summer shirt previously out of a blue 100% cotton, which I really liked. And so I knew I wanted to make it again, and I thought it would work really well for this yarn. So I made the size extra small, and it turned out to be a 32-inch finished bust circumference, so that's no ease, and I knit it 12 inches from the underarm to the hem. And it's beautifully lovely and drapey, so it weighs 283 grams. And the other thing that I did differently, which I also did in my blue one, is I added short rows. So the pattern as written doesn't have any short rows in it, and so what I did was, for this particular one and for my size, there are 4 sections of ribbing separated by 2 rows of stockinette, which is where you do the increases, to increase down for the yoke. And so what I did there was, every time there was a like straight after a ribbing section, I added 2 rows of short rows. So I just, instead of just going twice around with the increases, I added an extra back and front. So at the back, there's like 4 rows between each of the ribbing section, whereas at the front there's only 2. And then that allowed me to add 2 rows, 2 rows, 2 rows, 2 rows. So that's 8 total short rows that sort of space them out. And yeah, I've got a video on how I sort of add short rows to a project, so I'll put a link to that in the description below. But I'm just delighted with how this one came out. It's really, even though it's reasonably heavy yarn, bamboo is quite a heavy yarn, it feels lovely and drapey and just beautiful to the skin. And I'm not sure what the pattern's needle size is, but I used a 3.5mm needle, and I did Judy's Magic cast on for a tubular cast on, because you do actually start with a 1x1 rib, and look, you can do any, but you don't have to do a tubular cast on, you just do a long tail cast on. But I did, because it's a 1x1 rib, I did want to do a tubular cast on, because I did think it would look nice. So the version that I did was Judy's Magic cast on. So that's the first top that I made, first actual top with sleeves that I made in 2024. My second top is Early Bloomer by Heidi Kirrmaier, and the main yarn that I used for that was De Rerum Natura Penelope in the colourway Orgeat, and that's a 90% merino, 10% silk yarn. And it was nice enough to work with, but I did find, I felt like it was a little bit spongy, and it certainly wasn't the best for colour work, so I wouldn't use it again for colour work. And I think there's just other yarns that I like better. It's perfectly soft and nice, it just sort of felt a little bit, I don't know, just a bit spongy, sort of a hard way to describe it, but yeah. The contrast colours were some leftovers of Madeline Tosh DK Twist that I had in just a bunch of different colours that I had made a baby blanket out of. So I knit the 31-inch size bust, that's the extra small, and I was on gauge, and it came out at 31 inches, so that was a 20 stitch gauge. I knit it 11 inches from the underarm to the hem. It has some really lovely details of like a contrast colour for the neckline and the hem, which I think is really pretty. And even if the pattern doesn't have that, you could actually quite easily add that to a pattern. I think it's a really lovely, just a lovely design feature, especially if it's a real bright pop of colour like it is there. So yeah, I'm happy with it, and I think it's quite, like, it's a nice addition to my wardrobe, but I'm not 100% happy with the colour work. It's okay, but yeah, it's just, I don't think either of them were the best yarn for colour work, but still, I'm really happy I knit it, and a really lovely, well-written pattern. My third tea is the Poppy Tea by Petite Knit, and I knit that out of Sandysgarn Sunday and Sandysgarn Tin Silk Mohair, both in the colour 4008, which is a really lovely orangey red colour. I was really drawn to the colour that Petite Knit used, but that was Cardiff Classic Cashmere in the colourway Kirrmaier, and that was sort of out of stock everywhere. And obviously it's quite an expensive yarn, and I thought, well, look, I'll try it with this yarn first, and I love it. The only thing I would say is the tin silk mohair, the Sandisgarn tin silk mohair, is just a little bit, it's got a bit of a prickle factor, and because this is a tea and I plan to wear it next to skin, it wouldn't be my first choice of silk mohair for something that's like a next to skin garment anyway. But I'm really happy with it. I knit the extra small size, and that size is meant to be 35.5 inches with a 23 stitch gauge, but my gauge must have been a little bit tighter, around 24 stitches, because mine came out at 33.5 inches. So that's 1.5 inches of positive ease for me. Other than that, I really knit it to pattern, and it's a great pattern. It's actually really interesting to knit. It fits really well, and I already plan to make it again. I splurged on some Cardiff Classic cashmere in the black colorway, because I really wanted a nice, I really want this in my wardrobe as a nice classic black, beautiful next to skin top, and obviously that was the yarn that it was designed for. So this isn't my 2025 plans, but certainly preempting that, I do plan to make it again, and I already have the yarn for it. My fourth tea is the Clover Tea by Lene, Holme, Samsøe, and I knit that out of Cascade Ultra Pima in the colorway Buff. I knit it at a slightly tighter gauge, so I knit the extra small, which is meant to have a bust circumference of 36 inches at a gauge of 20 stitches over 4 inches, but my gauge was a bit tighter. I knit it one needle size smaller, 3.75 millimeter, and my finished bust circumference was 32 inches, so no ease there for me, and I really like how that fits. I also knit it 11 inches from underarm to hem, which is, generally a pretty good length for me, although it does kind of depend how long the arm side is as to where that finishes up. And it does have a fairly long arm side. You do the yoke increases and the eyelet detail, and then you do some more raglan increases at the end. And just be aware, if you're knitting this pattern, the eyelets do come down quite low. So either you might want to, well, if you're okay with your bra showing through because there's quite a lot of holes, and depending on your gauge, the holes might be larger. So you might want to wear like a nude camisole underneath it, or you might want to skip the last couple of rows of eyelets, which is probably pretty easy to do, and just maybe start the raglan increases a little bit earlier. Other than that, like, really well written pattern. There were meant to be some sleeve decreases, but I felt, particularly with my slightly tighter gauge, I didn't make any of those sleeve decreases. I just knit straight down. Yep, and I like it. It's a nice top and a well written pattern. So yep, that's the Clover Tea. That was my fourth tea for the year. My fifth tea is Charisma by Martin Storey, and I knit it out of the recommended yarn, which is Rowan Selects Patina in the colorway Confetti. I used a slightly smaller needle, a 3.5 millimeter needle, just to get gauge, and I knit this very differently from the pattern. The pattern is knit all separately in pieces, a lot of stair step bind off because it's got batwing sleeves, a lot of bind off 7, bind off 7, bind off 7, bind off 7, and then sewing that up in mattress stitch afterwards would be quite unpleasant. So I changed that to doing a lot of short rows. It was a bit of a slog, this pattern, and to be honest, with the finished object, I don't especially love it. It's like, it looks pretty, it feels nice and soft, but I just feel a bit frumpy when I wear it. So I wouldn't call that a success. I think I will wear it, but maybe I just need to find the right thing to wear it with. Yes, so anyway, watch this space. I'll report back later as to whether I actually do wear it much or not, because I only finished it in August last year. But anyway, we'll see. It's finished. And yeah, I can't say I would recommend the pattern, because it's just, it's not an easy, when I say not an easy pattern, it just wasn't, like, it's one page and it's a lot of do this the same as the other side. So it definitely doesn't hold your hand. And it also, with that kind of technique, the mattress stitch for that many stair step bind offs wouldn't be that pleasant. So anyway, it's finished. That's my fifth tea for 2024. My sixth tea is Jupiter Crop by Caitlin Hunter, and I used a kit for that out of the recommended yarn that I got on D-Stash. So that's Vovo by Retrosario Rosa Pomar. And this was an interesting one. I knit the smallest size, which is 33 3/4 inches, and I went up a needle size. This is a sport weight yarn, but it's very plump. So I went up a needle size to get gauge, and I still didn't get gauge. I probably could have gone up 2 needle sizes because the finished object is 30-inch bust. So yeah, my gauge was definitely tighter. I went up a needle size again for the sleeves because I do magic loop tighter, and I just didn't want them, you know, the stitch, like the number of stitches on the sleeves were quite small. So it's a pretty snug fit, but I'd probably wear it because it is quite cropped. I used as much of the brown yarn as I could to lengthen it, and so I knit it to 9.5 inches from the underarm to the hem, which is still quite cropped. So it's probably I know it's too cropped. I'm wearing it in the photos over some black pants, but like as soon as I move you would see my skin or a camisole underneath. So yeah, the way I would actually wear this is over just as sort of a crop top over a long dress. So it's nice and I do like it. I was a bit worried about the neckline, that it was flaring out, but it's turned out it's blocked out okay. And I think it is actually quite a nice top to put over like I have a couple of dresses from Not Perfect Linen, and so just to, like, if it's a little bit cooler in air conditioning, to pop that over one of those. Yeah, so that's my 6th top for the year. My 7th tea is the Shore Tea by Ventzel, and I use the recommended yarn, which is Isia Alpaca 1 and Isia Trio 2, which is a linen blend yarn. And I knit the smallest size, which is a size 1, which is a 37-inch bust, but my gauge was a bit tighter and it finished up at 33 inches, so 1 inch of positive ease. And I knitted 11 inches from the underarm to the hem, and the sleeves are 7.5 inches, so it sort of sits kind of nicely just above the elbow. And I love this top. I feel really elegant in it. It's got sort of a similar design to the Kirrmaier, but I don't know whether it's the color or the less fluffiness, but yeah, I really like it. But I have to say it was very hard on my hands and it was quite a slog. So the pattern is well written, like there's absolutely nothing wrong with the pattern. It was easy to follow. I think it was a combination of, it's actually quite a lot of knitting, and it was just really hard on my hands. So I'm trying to think how much I used. It's about 670 meters. So when you think about it, it's not huge yardage. So I think it really was just difficult with the linen, the inflexibility of the Trio 2, but I'm really, really happy with the finished result. I just couldn't see myself making it again due to the, yeah, I mean, I love it, I suppose, but also I don't really want another top exactly the same. I have this one. I love this one. I'm so glad I chose the color I did because I think it will be really versatile for my wardrobe. My 8th tea is the Cellwood Tea by Caitlin Hunter, and I knitted out of orange flower yarn, which is a merino cashmere silk blend, quite similar to Madeline Tosh Pashmina. Now I did knit this 1 needle size down on a 3.75mm needle because I kind of like that needle with this particular yarn. And even though I knit the smallest size, which is a 35.25 inch bust, mine turned out way smaller. Even after blocking, my gauge was, well, with my smaller gauge, it came out at 28-inch bust, so 4 inches of negative ease. But I think it really looks nice and tailored. Obviously with the lace it stretches, and I knitted 11.5 inches from underarm to hem. And yeah, I really like how this one turned out. I think it looks really elegant, and it was bottom up, and I don't knit a lot of bottom up patterns, but yeah, I found the lace, I did have to make sure, because it was slip stitches every other row, I really needed to pay attention in terms of which row I was on. It wasn't as difficult when I was knitting flat, but when I was knitting in the round, I really needed something like on my needles to make sure that I was keeping on track as to what row I was on. Yep, so it weighs 161 grams, so used about 1.5 skeins. And yeah, really lovely top, very happy with that one. My 9th tea was a test knit for Jennifer Steingass, and it's called Snowbloom. It hasn't been released yet, although it should be shortly, but I thought I can't show you the whole thing, but I can show you the yoke. And I knitted out of the recommended yarn, which is Bichet Bush Le Petite Lamb's Wool. This colour is medium grey, and I chose turquoise for the contrast colour, and I thought that that contrasts quite nicely. I made a lot of changes, and I did seek permission to make those changes. Normally there was a rolled neckline, but I did 4 rows of 1x1 rib, and I did short sleeves, and so I did ribbing on the sleeves and on the underarm, although the pattern itself has different treatments. It's long sleeves and I think a garter at the bottom. So that pattern will get released shortly. But I used 2 skeins of the medium grey, and for only about, I think about 19 grams of the turquoise. So it came out, I knit the smallest size, which I think has a bust of around 35 or 36 inches, but my gauge was just a little bit tighter, so the bust is 32 inches. And I knit it 10 inches from the underarm to the hem. But it was a really nice pattern. It was enjoyable to do the test knit. But I think, like for me, this is actually going to be a really lovely work top to wear with grey pants. And I knew that I would wear, so I didn't have enough yarn, even though I had another whole full skein. Maybe I could have got the sleeves out of that, but it would have been cutting it close, and I think I would get more wear out of it as a top than I would have as a sweater. So yeah, it's really lovely, and it blooms. This yarn, oh my goodness, it blooms so much. It feels so thin when you're knitting with it, but then when you block it, it just puffs up. And the gauge, even though my gauge must have been a tiny bit smaller, not substantially. Like it really, I was quite surprised how much it puffed up on blocking. So that's my 9th tea for the year. My last tea for the year, which I just finished on the 31st of December, is the Peacock Tea by Lene, Holme, Samsøe. And that one, actually, I used the same yarn, same designer, and the same stitch gauge as the Clover Tea, and I used the same yarn. So even though it's a different pattern, it actually kind of felt like a repeat knit. So I used Cascade Ultra Pima, 1 needle size down, 3.75 millimeter, and I knit it out of this red colorway. Now this pattern it does have quite a few differences from the Clover Tea. I think the Peacock Tea was released first, and the neckline was much higher. It had about 10 stitches less for the neckline. So I just used the cast on number for the Clover Tea. And also the yoke is substantially shorter. There's definitely less rows in the yoke of the Peacock Tea, which I thought was actually quite fine. I did all of I wasn't sure about cutting off maybe the last section of the lace for the Peacock Tea, but I ended up doing that to pattern. And I really liked, there were short rows to raise the back neckline, and the short rows actually incorporated the lace design. So I thought that was just a really nice feature to not have this big section of stockinette just underneath the ribbing, but to have the short rows in there to raise the back neckline. So it did feel like a repeat knit. It ended up the same bust circumference, like I had the same stitch count at the end. The yoke was a little bit shorter in depth, so this one sits a little bit higher. Still 11.5 inches from underarm to hem, but just the whole thing's up a little bit. Yep, and a 32-inch bust, even though, so my gauge was just a tiny bit tighter. So, but that yarn also as well is really easy on the hands, and it was a really nice final knit for the year. I made 7 pullovers in 2024, and I'm absolutely delighted with every single one of them. I knit them with more positive ease than I have traditionally, and that's been really nice for me. I just find that I'm reaching for these sweaters, not just because they're new, but because they're more comfortable to wear. Now, a lot of them don't have a huge amount of positive ease, but just 2 to 5 inches. It's they're just more enjoyable for me to wear, and I also just like how they look. So the first one is the Armour Sweater by Ankestrick, and I knit that as a test knit, and I hadn't done a test knit in like a decade, and it was so fun. I knit it out of Madeline Tosh Dandelion in the colourway Paper and Knitting for Olive Soft Silk Mohair in the colourway Oat. And both yarns were so lovely and soft and beautiful to work with. I knit the smallest size, the size 1, which is a 37 3/4 inch bust. My gauge was a little bit smaller, and it turned out 34 inches. So that's 2 inches of positive ease for me, and that just feels comfortable. It doesn't feel sloppy, it just feels tailored, but a little bit of room. And so yeah, really happy with, but it was actually, sorry, that's my dog. That was, it was 30 inches before blocking. So the stitch actually does definitely stretch out a little bit after blocking. I knit it, the sleeves were 18 inches and the body length from the underarm to the hem was 12 inches. It actually wasn't a huge amount of yarn. It was 820 meters of yarn, and it has this really lovely funnel neck. I love everything about this sweater, and I just really enjoyed being part of the test knit. Like the other test knitters were just really lovely and encouraging, and I think a number of them have done lots of test knits for Ankestrick. So yeah, anyway, it was great, and I'm really happy with the finished object, and I definitely reach for it quite often. It's a lovely, lovely knit. So my second sweater was the Storm Sweater by Petite Knit, and that was certainly the most oversized sweater I think I've ever made. I knit the extra small, which has a bust circumference of 42.5 inches, and I used the recommended yarn, which is Peer Gynt, Sanders Garn Peer Gynt, in the colourway Ash Melange. and I used everything recommended needle size, and I got gauge, so mine is about 10 inches of positive ease, which for me, like, I love it because I don't have any sweaters that are that big and oversized, but I have to say we're getting sort of into sloppy territory here. So it's very much like, it's definitely a cozy knit, but it's also quite heavy. So it weighs 670 grams. So I had 13 skeins, which is technically that should be 650 grams, but obviously each of the balls were a little bit heavier. So I didn't quite use, I definitely got into the 13th skein, but I had 30 grams left over. It's actually quite a nice yarn. It feels just a bit workhorse, but it actually softens up on washing. And yeah, I love it. It was so fun to knit as well. All of the panels, there was a new thing, and it just really kept your interest. The construction was really interesting as well. So I highly recommend the pattern, both as a garment, but also as a fun project to make. Now, there is a Storm Sweater Junior, but you might want to be aware that, like, the Storm Sweater as an adult has a really nice trapezoid in the back neck, but the Storm Sweater Junior, so if you're thinking of sizing down, that doesn't have the nice trapezoid. So what I would recommend is, if you wanted to size down, maybe use a lighter weight yarn. You could still follow the directions for length, but it would certainly bring it in. And a lot of the sections, if you found that you weren't getting long enough in the sections, like with a lighter weight yarn and smaller needles, they are, aside from the diamond patterns, most of them are kind of, you could add a couple of rows in here or there. So that would be my recommendation. If the thing that's been holding you back from making it is just how oversized it is, you might want to just use a lighter weight yarn, go down a needle size, but you will have to do a little bit of, finagling along the way, just because your row gauge might be a bit different. But that would also, like, because it's got a very long section for the arms, that will also shrink that to you. So you might want to use that for to your advantage as well. But anyway, that was my second sweater, and I really love it. My third sweater was Snow Wonder by Heidi Kirrmaier, and I used a Rerum Natura Gilead in the colorway CL. And I love this sweater. I knit the extra small size, so there is an extra small, but there's also an extra small, and that's a 34 3/4 inch bust circumference, and I got gauge, so that's what mine finished up at, and it's a 19 stitch gauge. I did have to make the arm side a little bit longer. I followed the pattern, split off for the sleeves, and then when I tried it on, I realized it was really tight, so I just had to I think I did 6 more rows before splitting off, and I just followed the bubble pattern, but just continued on in the in the round, and keeping the sleeves on as well, because everything else is stockinette, and then I split off afterwards. Now, I bought 3 skeins originally, and it wasn't enough, and so when I went back to, I think it was the Knitting Loft that I bought it from, they actually had more of the yarn in the same dye lot. So I was so grateful, because I had already had I'd made the Manhattan hat out of this yarn, and I had a bit left of that, but it was definitely a different colorway, like a different dye lot, sorry, same colorway, different dye lot. So I knew that was going to be a bit problematic to try to incorporate that, and I also didn't think it would be enough. So actually, I don't actually have how much it weighs, so I'll have to I'll weigh it and put down here on the screen how much it weighs. But I did use most of the 4 balls. But yeah, really lovely. This yarn's really nice as well. It's very it's just very squishy and really nice to knit with, and yeah, just I highly rate it. So, and everything else that I did, aside from the 6 extra rows for the arm side, I followed the pattern, and I love Heidi's patterns. They're really well written and really clear, and I'm really happy with the finished object. My 4th sweater was Woolen Berries by Locatelli, and I used Cardiff Classic Cashmere for this sweater, and that was my first time using that yarn, and I absolutely love it. I completely copied the colour and the yarn from another Ravelry user, Lene. I just really liked her version. It looked so polished and stylish. So that was a white colourway and a dark navy called Cosmo. So I used just under 7 skeins or 7 balls of the white, and 1.6 skeins of the Cosmo. And I knit the smaller size, the extra small size, which is meant to be a 36 3/4 inch bust, but my gauge was a bit tighter. Like that gauge was meant to be 20.5 stitches, but I used a different yarn, and so my gauge was a bit tighter, and mine came out 34 inches, which is just like that. that sort of seems to be my sweet spot with a sort of a tailored sweater, 2 inches of positive ease. So 34-inch bust, 13.5 inches from underarm to hem, and reasonably long sleeves, 19-inch sleeves. This was quite fun to knit actually. You did these little panels down here. Because my gauge was a bit different, I did have to modify that a little bit, just make it a little bit longer. But yeah, like it was, so it's sort of like it was fun to knit. You knit these panels, then you picked up and worked down. And Joji writes amazing patterns. She's such a talented designer. I really like her aesthetic, and she writes really well. So, and this yarn, oh my goodness, it is this, and I'll tell you later, the Mayak that I knit for Fjolla, like they are 2 of the softest, most loveliest sweaters that I own. I'm not sure, like I haven't worn it a lot. When did I finish? I finished it in August, sort of towards the end of winter. So it hasn't had a lot of wear yet, so I'm not sure what the pill factor will be like, but I'll be taking good care of this sweater because obviously it's an investment, and I'm really pleased that I knit it in colours that I think I'll get a lot of wear out of. My 5th sweater is Magnolia Bloom by Camilla Vad, and this is a really bulky weight sweater where the pattern as written uses 2 strands of fingering and 2 strands of silk mohair on really large needles. Now I just used 1 strand of sport weight, so I used a Rivam Natura Ulysse in the colorway Briere, and I used two strands of Hedgehog Fibers Kid Silk lace. Now I ran out of the Kid Silk lace because obviously with 2 strands, so I used about 720 meters of the Ulysse, but obviously that's about 1,400, close to 1,500 meters of the Kid Silk lace. So I did run out, and I had to order another, and I had bought this, so that was the colorway Purr, and I had bought this years ago, and so there was no way I was going to get anything near the same dye lot. And yeah, it looked completely different when I got the new one, and I was really worried, but I did manage to just sort of alternate it in, or hold, because I was holding 2 strands, I held one of the old and one of the new, and managed to work it out, but it was a bit of a challenge. I knit the medium size, but on smaller needles, because I only had 1 strand of the sport instead of 2 of the fingering. So it ended up, even though I knit the medium size, which I can't remember what that finished bust was, but mine ended up 36 inches, so 4 inches of positive ease. And like given the larger gauge, like I think you definitely, if you've got a bulky-ish sweater, you do not want that skin tight. That's not going to look very nice. So 4 inches of positive ease for that kind of sweater in that cut, because it's very warm, I think is perfect. It was fun to make. I enjoyed, like, it's very quick, because even with the like I did use slightly smaller needles, it was still mostly knit. I used a 5.5 mil for the ribbing and 6.5 millimeter for the body, so it definitely was a fast knit. So 36-inch bust, 12 inches from the underarm to the hem, and 18-inch sleeves, and I love the color, and I'm really, like, I was worried when that new yarn arrived, and I was like, how's this going to work? I don't want to turn this into a vest or a short sleeve top, so I'm really happy with the finished outcome, and I don't think you can really tell where I ended up switching. So yep, that was another winner. My 6th sweater was Fjolla by Isabell Kraemer, and I used the recommended yarn, which is Mayak Baby Lace held double, and I used the colorway Oat, and I love this sweater. I mean, the yarn is divine. It is so beautiful. I used 4.5 skeins. I knit the smallest size, which is 35 3/4 inches, and mine finished up around 36 inches. So I got gauge, but I did have to go up a needle size. So the gauge is 21 stitches over 4 inches, and I did get gauge, but on a 4mm needle. So 36-inch bust. I can't remember how long the sleeves are, but I knit pretty much everything to pattern, and it's so lovely and so soft. So that's 4 inches of positive ease, and it's just a delight to wear. Definitely next to skin soft, and I really would like to use this yarn again for something in the future. My 7th and final sweater for the year is the Clay Sweater by Ozetta, and another winner. I am so happy with it. So I knit the smallest size, which is a 39-inch size, but my gauge was a tiny bit tighter, and mine came out 37 inches, so that's 5 inches of positive ease. I used BC Yarn Loch Lomond, and I used 1 needle size down. I think this yarn is a little bit lighter than the recommended yarn, and so my gauge was a bit tighter, but I was quite happy for that to just come in just a tiny bit smaller. So it was a really nice yarn. It's woolen spun, so it's quite lofty and has great yardage and really affordable. It's a really, really good yarn. So that sweater only weighs 312 grams, but because that's actually less than 650 gram skeins, because the skeins were a little bit heavier. So very affordable and also really nice and light to wear. It weighs less than half of my Storm sweater, and yet it sort of is a similar kind of, oversized style sweater. So it has a really lovely funnel neck, sort of this kind of not quite garter, but sort of very simple texture. But you do have quite a lot of slip stitches, so similar, like running down a panel down the sleeves and under the arm. So you definitely have to make sure you know which round you're on, just to be sure that you know whether you're slipping that stitch or knitting that stitch. But once you sort of get into the rhythm, it's fine. But just you don't want to make too many assumptions, because there's a number of times that I slipped when I should have knit and vice versa. I really liked that in this sweater when she talks about swatching, she actually gives you the actual directions for a swatch, so that you then measure from that in pattern for both the stitch and the row gauge. And yeah, really, I'm so happy with it. So 37-inch bust, 17 and a quarter inch sleeves, and 12 and a quarter inches from the underarm to the hem. And yeah, really so happy. And I think this is going to be another really wearable sweater in my wardrobe. I just made the one cardigan last year, which is interesting because I'd really like to have more cardigans in my wardrobe, but for some reason I just don't seem to be casting them on. But I did make the one, and it was the Champagne cardigan by Petite Knit. Now I knit the smallest size, which is actually a 44.5-inch size, but I definitely made modifications. Mine, I had gauge of 18 stitches. I used this really old stash that I'd bought off eBay called Shepherd Yarn Supreme that I'd bought, I think, in 2008. Along with Knit Picks Aloft in the colorway Oat. So I'm really happy with the color. It's sort of very, very creamy, but a warm, like a darker kind of warm cream. And I think I'm totally happy with the final outcome. So mine ended up 38 inches, 16-inch sleeves, and 12 inches from the underarm to hem. So for me, that's 6 inches of positive ease, which I think is that work. 44 inches would have been crazy. Another reason I couldn't have made it that big is I was going to run out of yarn, and there's no way, given I bought it so long ago off eBay, I couldn't get any more. And the yarn was it was in these little 25-gram balls. So, I mean, there was a lot of, anyway, it was a lot of finagling in this sweater, but I'm really, really happy with the outcome. I had a different row gauge, so my rows were actually a little bit taller, so I just alternated for the V-neck. I did the decreases a little bit more frequently because I think my row gauge was a bit taller. And I definitely didn't do all the raglan increases. The nice thing about this kind of construction is that even though it's bigger than I wanted it to, I just was able to just cut out some of the increases and also cast on less stitches under the arms. And I really pretty rapidly decreased on the sleeves to get them to use less yarn and to just get the circumference down a little bit. But I'm so happy with the final outcome, and even the buttons were from Stash, and I've had them for over 10 years. So really, I only made the one cardigan. It was a bit of a nail biter with making sure I had enough yarn. I think I also did a thinner button band, which it turned out okay, and obviously I don't think I had the yarn to do a wider one, but I wouldn't mind making this pattern again, although it's just so oversized and there's so much modifications that I have to make for that. But I guess I could just use a lighter weight yarn. It's got an 18 stitch gauge. I could easily use a yarn that has maybe a 22 stitch gauge, and that would just bring the whole thing in. And I do want to make more cardigans, so it's it's a big thumbs up for the finished object. But yes, sizing wise, it's just a little bit oversized. But I am delighted with the finished object. I just made the one vest this year, and that was the Stockholm Slipover by Petite Knit. And I used Held Together Rowan Felted Tweed DK, which is quite a light DK, in the colourway Scree, and Knitting for Olive Soft Silk Mohair in the colourway Soft Blue. I knit the smallest size, which is size 1, and that's 35 3/4 inches. And I pretty much got the gauge of 19 stitches over 4 inches because mine ended up 36 inches. And I used a 4.5mm needle. I knit it pretty much to pattern. It used very little yarn, only 420 meters of yarn for my size. And the only thing that I did differently is I picked up slightly less stitches for the neck and the arm. But other than that, knit it pretty much to pattern, and yeah, I really like it. I think it looks really nice over a button-up shirt and dress pants for work. Just looks quite nice and polished. So that was my one vest for the year. I just have the one skirt as a finished object this year, and that's the Carlaby Skirt by Nicole Law. And the knitting on this had actually been finished quite a while ago, but there was still a fair bit of finishing work to do. So I am proud, and it certainly wasn't wearable until this year. So I'll show you what it is. It's the this is a free pattern, and this is the third time I've made this skirt. And I used Lorna's Lace's green line worsted in this red colorway, and I used 3 skeins, and it was in this sort of pinky red color, and the third skein was completely different to the other 2, and it's really almost impossible to alternate in this pattern with the way that it's written. I mean, I suppose you could, but I didn't anyway, and it was really obvious where this line was. And I think I tried to over dye it like 3 times. Anyway, I finally got a color that looked even and I was happy with, and I've sewed on the buttons, and I knit it using, it's quite a dense gauge, it's fluff on it, it's quite a dense gauge pattern, so I knit it on a 4mm needle, but you kind of want that for a skirt, right? You don't, well, at least for this kind of skirt, because for this I wear this over tights and boots, and so it's meant to sort of have a bit of structure and heft and weight to it. With all the over dyeing, it definitely has shrunk quite a bit, so it's pretty fitted. But you know, if you're wearing it over black tights and everything, and just like a plain black top, yeah, it's finally finished. I do really recommend the pattern. I love the black one that I wear all the time. I really love that one, and I have an orange one that is a bit of a statement piece that I don't wear that often, just because it's so bright. It's Madeline Tosh vintage in the colorway Citrus. And also, I don't think the vintage is as good a yarn as something like this that has a little bit of, I'll show it a little bit, just has a bit of fuzz factor to it. I don't know, I just think that that's a better choice for a skirt anyway. So yes, that's the one finished object where it's actually finally wearable in 2024. That's it for the garments that I've knit in 2024. I think I'll do a separate one for accessories and shawls and smaller items. Otherwise, this will just be too long. So if you've stuck with me for this long, I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope that you'll subscribe if you haven't already, and come and watch my regular videos throughout the year. I have been doing weekly podcasts up until now, but in 2025 I'll be switching to fortnightly or every other week podcasts where I share the projects that I'm making. It's mostly knitting, but there will be a little bit of crochet, maybe a little bit of sewing, and hopefully a little bit of weaving and any other craft, but it is always going to be mostly knitting. So thanks so much for sticking with me up to this point, and I hope you'll watch the accessory video when that comes out.